Mini LED battle in the heavyweight division. Samsung QN90D versus the Sony Bravia 7, 75 inches. Up next.
I've seen things people wouldn't believe.
Hey, what's up guys? I'm Brian. This is Tech Therapy. Thank you so much for joining me for today's mini LED battle between the Samsung QN90D and the Sony Bravia 7. I love both of these TVs. I reviewed them both more than once, and I'm circling back to compare them. What's interesting about both of these is they are either flagship or near flagship. Both of these amazing models have been overshadowed by their own siblings. For the Samsung, that's the AK QN900D, as well as the true flagship QN95D. For Sony's Bravia 7, the Bravia 9 is out there, that more famous sibling, as well as the returning champ, the Sony A95L QD OLED. Because of that competition within their own families, these two amazing TVs have been overlooked. Today I'm here to compare them, not just to see which one is best, but which one is best for you. Without further ado, let's check out the Samsung QN90D versus the Sony Bravia 7 at 75 inches. Thank you so much for watching. All right, guys, let's do it. Let's check the reflection handling in a very bright room, even with the lights on. Both off are semi-gloss. The Samsung has superior reflection handling. You see me clearly, though they both have a muddy look when the TVs are off. Quick look at the design. Metal center stand, thin black bezel, smooth back of the TV. Moving over to the Sony, small badge in the corner, small silver bezel, barely noticeable. You have 4 placements for the stand: narrow, wide, narrow, high, wide, high to make room for the soundbar. Flush stand, so the soundbar goes over the top of it, going to the back. Silver bezel, thick, more textured back compared to the QN90D. 2 different remotes, both pretty simple. Samsung's is rechargeable and solar powered. Moving into the operating systems, you have Tizen versus Google. Tizen has become one of my favorite operating systems. Very snappy, and more importantly, it picks up right where you left off. You can see there in the recent tab. Over to Google on the Bravia 7. Google, fine at launch, tends to get a little sluggish over time. Also, the blooming you see on the icons is because the local dimming is not enabled in menus. Now, moving back into the reflection handling, again, while the Samsung is superior in terms of its reflection handling, it will change the contrast if the sun hits it directly. If I switch these TVs, they would look a little different in that regard. So you do have better reflections on the Samsung. However, if the light hits it directly, it will raise it a bit and it will flatten it out. Now, as we go through these demos, I will change the presets every so often. The light conditions will also change. Very important, the presets as filmmaker and professional can look very similar. Same with movie and cinema. They will look vastly different in standard, dynamic, and vivid. Checking out the local dimming, they both look excellent. A little more haloing around the Bravia 7. And keep in mind that QN90D has many more zones than the Bravia 7, but it's the algorithm that keeps up and the processing that keeps up on the Bravia 7. Slightly more haloing on the corners of the Bravia 7. Now they're both mini LEDs. They both are quantum dots, even though Sony doesn't really call them quantum dots. I mentioned earlier about the processing of the XR cognitive processor as far as the algorithm and the backlight. It's amazing what it does with less zones. The colors match up pretty well, though the Samsung many times has a more pure white in comparison to the Bravia 7. You can see how fast the local dimming moves. Moving into dynamic and vivid. What I like about what Sony does with their vivid presets and standard presets is that you can see here, as bright as it is, it still won't let it clip. Where Samsung will go as hard as it can. If it clips, it clips. Sony avoids that. Tries to keep the detail there. And that's what I find so interesting about the different signatures and presets. That's why it's so important to move out of just filmmaker and professional or even movie and cinema. Keeping this on here because it's a very filmic content from our good friend Jennifer Gala. But when you move out of movie and cinema into dynamic, vivid, or even standard, you'll see the bigger difference between the two. I put them in these other presets as not everybody watches them in filmmaker and professional. Now moving into standard, you'll see the differences here. I let them be what they are out of the box. I don't perceptually match them. Their standard versus their standard. It's not like I change one for the other, because that's their signature. Each TV has more flexibility of image, though advanced contrast enhancer, things like that on the Samsung are much more impactful. The tone mapping from active to static makes a huge difference, not so much on the Sony with brightness preferred and gradation preferred, slight difference there. So the flexibility of image is always going to go to Samsung if that's something that you prefer. As far as accuracy and the image looking more even-keeled, that's going to be on the Bravia 7. And also what I mean by that is that Sony seems to still keep the bringing cinema home moniker. So even though there is that flexibility to make the picture very vibrant and saturated, they will kind of stop you at a certain point to make sure the image still keeps the detail. You'll see in some of these shots where there's more detail in the grass and on the clouds on the Bravia 7, where the Samsung will pretty much brighten. Though it'll still have dimension, you'll lose some of that detail. Now in terms of processing, the win easily goes to the Sony Bravia 7. The XR cognitive processor is next level. It would match the 8K QN90D, which is the real flagship of Samsung's lineup, let alone the processor on the QN90D. QN90D's processor is also great for upscaling, but I give the nod to the Bravia 7. For what I mentioned before, keeping clipping to a minimum, keeping the detail intact no matter what, even in its most vivid preset. Upscaling detail, you'll always have that shadow detail as well. It won't wash it out no matter how hard you try. Now we're going to remain in this more poppy preset of standard for the beginning of this demo from Jen, and then we're going to switch around and do all the picture presets in real time, and we'll go back to some of these shots in a more accurate preset, such as movie and cinema. Now into this next shot, while we're still in standard, we're going to take a moment and actually go through the presets in real time, starting with the Samsung. We'll begin in dynamic, move down to standard. The eco mode will dim over time. We'll go into then movie, and then filmmaker, which is where we're going to leave it. Then we're going to go back around to vivid on the Sony, then down to standard, then into cinema, professional being the most accurate, calm, photo, and then IMAX enhanced. Now, one at a time, we'll show what we'll be comparing today, which is filmmaker and professional being closest, movie and cinema, standard preset, then dynamic and vivid. Then we'll move back into a more accurate preset, movie and cinema. Now, why I wander out of these presets into the more dynamic and standard presets, as that's somewhere the Samsung really excels. Otherwise, they look very similar. The Samsung has more headroom and more flexibility of image, and I have to showcase that, or I'd be robbing the Samsung of that headroom, which the Bravia 7 doesn't quite possess. And it's not that the Bravia 7 is not capable, but I do believe the signature is keeping it back to keep accuracy, even bright, vibrant, saturated accuracy. This is a punishing demo. These guys both kill it. Both the Q90D and the Bravia 7 local dimming dead on is excellent. This is not an easy demo. Plus, the shadow detail is evident on both. I thought the QN90D would crush it a bit. It does not. Though we are both in accurate presets, they both have excellent shadow detail in these shots. And they almost look equally bright, again, because we are in movie and cinema. Again, why it's important to wander out to show you what both of them can do. Now, while professional and filmmaker are close, professional is still punchier than the previous preset, which was custom for Sony. It's not always comparable to match filmmaker and professional. Professional still has a bit more pop. Movie and cinema are closer, though we are going to move into filmmaker and professional because I'm looking for color accuracy in this next demo. Now, if I wanted to compare it to filmmaker and professional and just call it a day, the video can be 5 minutes, but you'd be missing the strengths of both. Now you can see that the Samsung can actually be very accurate. They've worked very hard in the last number of years to not just be Samsung bright and saturated. They can be accurate when they need to be, as you can tell in this shot coming up. Very realistic image, but they have the ability to go brighter than that. As I've mentioned, the Bravia 7 can as well, but Sony's adherence to bringing cinema home keeps it from getting out of hand, which I do like because the clarity is always there. It almost never clips, no matter how bright the image is. Now in this next demo, we'll go into standard and let the Samsung flex a bit. But you tell me which you prefer in these shots. Now, as far as what horse I have in the race, both these TVs have been sent to me from the manufacturers, meaning the QN90D from Samsung and the Bravia 7 from Sony. These are loaners. They are going back. I also reviewed both these TVs earlier in the year. I requested them back as I knew they'd be more popular this time of year as the prices have fallen. They're about the same price. Both very expensive at launch, especially the QN90D. And because they're overlooked, I requested to review them again and compare them later in the year. Now, going through these different demos, which do you prefer? Special thanks to the one and only Jennifer Gala and her second channel, HDR SUPER CHANNEL. Most of the demos you see here within the video and in the intro are hers. Check the description below for links to her channels, and think about becoming a Patreon to her channels to download these demos in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. Speaking of Dolby Vision, obviously the Samsung does not have Dolby Vision. It has HDR 10 Plus, the Sony Dolby Vision. So in a way, it's a wash depending on which format you prefer. For me, the lack of Dolby Vision is not a deal breaker, as I do find Samsung's HDR10 implementation to be excellent. But as you can see, both can be very vibrant, very punchy, and very saturated when needed. It all depends on which one you prefer, as we check out the local dimming and we'll check out the viewing angles on both. Both dead-on. Local dimming is excellent. Black bars, even in standard, are perfectly black. Now, staying in standard, trying to get them to bloom, we have to go way off angle to see it. Unfortunately, I did this portion. Some of the reflection is showing, but you can see where they do light up a bit. But I am very off angle. I'm also above and below each TV. You can see it there in the corners on the Bravia 7. And oddly enough, at the QN90D, it does show up in the most random times, as you see it right there and then disappears, but not in the corners. So what's interesting is the algorithm for the Bravia 7 is more intricate. It has its limitations, yet the QN90D has a better local dimming in spots and then will bloom randomly out of nowhere. But dead center, they are both better, being right in front of them. Moving into gaming. Now we're going to stay in original and standard for the first part of this demos, but here is some context. The Q90D has way more flexibility of image. It has more presets. The Bravia 7 has 3. They can look very different from one another. Actually, RTS and standard look somewhat the same. RTS is a little more deep. FPS will appear pretty useless as it just pumps up the black equalizer, making it brighter. I'll show you how to knock that down to make them more comparable. The QN90D has many more options in terms of supported resolutions. It has 4 HDMI 2.1, where the Sony has 2. It is the better gaming TV, more versatile and more flexibility of image, as I mentioned before. However, you're seeing in this shot here of Dirt 5 where you will lose the detail. Even in original, which is the most accurate preset, it does tend to wash out. That is something you can't change much on the QN90D. Again, this is the more tame preset compared to the Bravia 7 standard. So like the other demos, you can see where the Samsung sometimes will hurt itself by trying to be too bright. You will lose the detail in the clouds and in the grass. The Sony Bravia 7's game mode is gorgeous. It is very accurate. In comparison to the Samsung, it can look dull at times. We'll move through the features of both. They both have nice game bars. Sony implemented theirs a few years ago. They did just recently add this YouTube guide, and you can do multi-view. I haven't tried it yet, but they do have this option, which has been new with the latest update. You can resize the screen, something you really can't do on the QN90D. Though there are widescreen features, and you can change the aspect ratio on the Q90D. What the Q90D has that Sony does not is the Game Motion Plus, which is a game changer, especially for the new PS5 games that are 30 FPS. It will add frames without lag. The Sony, however, does have reality creation, which can clean up and sharpen the image without much noise. So they both have their strengths and weaknesses. Actually, they both just have their strengths. Now, with the genre settings on the Samsung, each one can be changed and saved. Original being the most accurate. There's also HDR10 Plus Gaming, where the Sony has the Dolby Vision Gaming. Samsung also has its own form of HGIG, which actually looks very good. If you find yourself on that preset, you'll see everything locked out. As we move through the presets on the Sony, the FPS one will look incredibly washed out. It's designed to give you the ability to see enemies in corners. At the end of this clip, I'm going to show you how to go in and knock down the black equalizer just so it's brighter and looks more comparable or more comparable to the Samsung. see we're in the original preset. Moving over to custom 2, it's very saturated. That can also be made to look more natural if need be. Again, contrast enhancer, things of that nature, much more impactful on the QN90D. Active and static tone mapping, huge differences in image. Now I'm going to go into the FPS mode of the Bravia 7 and quickly show you how to change it to make it look more like the punchy presets on the Samsung. Now, why am I taking the time to do this? The Samsung doesn't need it. You can make it look however you really want it to. However, the FPS mode looks terrible out of the box on the Sony. And if you go by that, you're never going to use it, because I never really use it. So I went in and decided to knock down the black equalizer. In this one scenario, I'll knock it down, I'll take it completely off, and it'll remain brighter than RTS and standard. So they're clearly leaving this preset brighter. It doesn't really clip. However, you have to do these steps, knock down black equalizer to either 0 or low. Because if not, if I leave it just original versus standard, you'll see it not look great, especially in this next shot with Returnals. And this is what you would see. That's original on the left versus RTS on the right. And I'll go back in and do the same steps, bringing up the Sony's FPS mode while knocking down the black equalizer, making it look more like the Samsung. But in terms of gaming, the Samsung is definitely more versatile, more resolutions, more ability to change the image. They will take the win here, though Sony has come a very long way, especially with these 3 presets. Just in the FPS preset, knock down black equalizer. That way it's not so washed out, and I think you'll be much happier with it, and you'll have a more bright, vibrant preset. Otherwise, it'll look pretty dark in comparison to the QN90D. But in terms of gaming, the nod would go to the QN90D. Again, versatility, more resolutions, just more everything. Now, considering the Bravia 7 is hanging right there with the QN90D, when in reality the Bravia 9 should be battling the QN90D. Though there is a QN95D, so they don't quite match. They do match in price. But think to yourself, not just in gaming and throughout this entire video, is what do you prefer? What signature do you prefer? As you see me now going into the different presets of the Samsung. Which image do you like? It's not really about which one is best. It's down to which you prefer. What is more important to you when viewing? Now, in closing, as I just mentioned, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the moniker of Sony, bring cinema home? They're still accurate no matter how bright or saturated. They'll still keep that accuracy in check. Or do you want the natural flexibility of the Samsung QN90D, where you can go from a natural accurate image to something crazy, saturated, and vibrant? Which do you prefer in these shots? Let me know in the comments which one you would purchase, as they are about the same price right now. Both TVs actually sound pretty equal in terms of sound, build quality, they're also pretty equal. I'm Brian, this is Tech Therapy. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. Take care. Love you guys.
It's better to burn